Very well. Now it's time for the next session. I'm very happy that we have Liv Carroll from Accenture and the Global Mining Guideline Group here. We will continue a bit on the outside-in view. And Liv has been with us 3 years ago, maybe. And it will continue in the same theme, giving us an update on what is happening outside of Boliden and also how we can kind of capture the value of digitalization and AI. So please, welcome.
Morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to spend the next 25 minutes or so talking about harnessing the power of digital and AI, which is not an awful lot of time given how passionate I am about the industry and how huge this topic is. So I'm going to set my timer here just to keep an eye on it myself. Very many thanks to Marcus and Frederick for inviting me back 3 years on from when I was last here. I like the addition of the rug on the stage. I think this might be to prevent people from breaking into a tap dance. They've asked me to highlight through my talk what has changed between then and now, so I will do that as we go along. One thing that definitely hasn't changed, for those who remember my talk from last time, I still cry every time I leave home. Nothing to do with home necessarily. I don't actually live in my motherland, but I am rather attached to my husband and our Rhodesian Ridgeback dog. One thing that has changed is I remembered that dresses don't work well with this speaker get up, so I've managed to remember to put some trousers on so it can fix it to the back. For those that I haven't had the pleasure of working with yet, a brief intro. So I'm, as Marcus said, with Accenture. I'm a managing director based in the UK. I've got multiple hats. I'm our EMEA mining lead. And I'm also our global data and AI lead for natural resources, which covers mining, metals, forest products, and construction materials. I am a chartered geologist by trade and have a master's from the Royal School of Mines there, which is that little picture, in mineral project appraisal. I'm, as I say, passionate about our industry and very committed to working with all of the mining companies across the globe to improve the way we do things, particularly leveraging digital and AI. I'm also a director on the board of the Global Mining Guidelines Group, have worked for almost 8 years now alongside Andrew Scott here, my friend, which is an incredible organisation. And if you want more information about that, please feel free to come and ask me at the break. So we'll start with some industry trends. And some of these are very similar to where we were 3 years ago. What really has changed is that a lot of it is ramped up, and that's ramped up for a number of reasons. So we were talking about critical minerals 3 years ago. What is very clear now is the forecast for the demand for critical minerals as we move towards the energy transition, and particularly as we head towards 2030 and then the longer term outlook to 2050. That has resulted in quite a number of mergers and acquisitions. And you can see that a lot of the mining companies are particularly targeting copper and lithium. In fact, I was at the ICMM, the International Council of Mining and Metals, their Responsible Mining Forum last week. And there was a very interesting presentation from someone who forecasts supply and demand for a living. And what the projections show is that copper and lithium are the two critical minerals that there is going to be a significant shortfall for. It is anticipated we will meet the needs of the other critical minerals. Shareholders, they really are and have been over the last 5, 6, 7 years very active in driving the industry to change. And this is particularly obvious now around ESG, decarbonisation and the demands for transparency and disclosure, which has led to a lot of legislation and regulations being developed, and that is forcing the mining companies to monitor environmental and social differently, but also communicate their activities and actions and impact differently. Consumers, no different to 3 years ago. We are all mindful that we need to be more sustainable. We're all wanting low carbon, responsibly sourced products. Stakeholder expectations and engagement, that hasn't changed. One interesting thing from last week was that all of the CEOs who spoke at ICMM spoke about communication and the importance of communicating with the stakeholders, particularly to maintain social license to operate. And it's not one-way communication, and it's not one size fits all. You need to tailor to culture. You need to enable those stakeholders, particularly the community, to be able to communicate back with you. And then workforce. Again, we've been aware of the skills shortage. We've been aware of the need to upskill our current workforces, particularly in the space of digital. We're not moving fast enough on that as an industry. There's a study that shows by 2025 there will be a 35% labour shortfall in Australia alone in the mining industry. So we really need to do more, and part of that is that the millennials and Gen Z really don't like mining. We have a brand issue. They are, it's not an attractive industry on the whole. And I appreciate there are millennials and there are Gen Z folks working in the mining industry, but we are struggling to attract the level of influx that we used to several decades ago. And so we need to shift how we present ourselves in an industry. And my view is we need to move from we dig mineral out of the ground to we steward our natural resources. We can discuss that over a coffee because that is a very big conversation as to how we do that. How is this then reflecting for the mining industry? Speed to discovery. As a geoscientist, I am delighted that we're doing quite a bit of work with a number of the major mining companies in the exploration and geoscience space. Capital project control, there are a lot of major projects in the pipeline. And like all capital projects, cost overrun and time overrun, time delays to first ore are problematic. So there is a lot of focus and investment on getting that right, not least because we need to bring this mineral online rapidly. Big focus on ESG, particularly energy, water, waste, and now biodiversity, with the recently released task force on nature-related financial disclosures, which is now forcing our industry to actually capture decent data in time periods that matter and then be able to disclose that. I seem to have lost the... There we go. So, what can we do? Well, one, harnessing the value of scalable technology, and scalable has been mentioned a few times already this morning. That's the fact that it is scalable, or it needs to be designed to be scalable, is critical. And that's where we have failed in the whole digital transformation piece that started 10 years ago or so. I've put first on the list there data culture and insights-driven workflows, because so often in digital and AI, we look at it as a technology problem. We need to implement this new technology. And really, what we're doing commonly is continuing with the same processes and the same workflows we've always had, but we're just making them a bit more efficient, and we're speeding them up. What we need to be doing is actually rethinking those workflows entirely. And I was really pleased to see that you are working in conjunction with the operator to design solutions, because that is definitely the answer to developing the right solutions and the new processes, new ways of working. Cloud-hosted data, critical for critical for Gen AI, but also critical really to enable interoperable and end-to-end operations. Data analytics and AI, I'll talk about in more detail. Digital interfaces, mobile platforms for that operational awareness, and really without operational awareness and having data in a time frame in which it matters, you can't improve and you can't change anything. Remote and autonomous operations, not new, certainly still high on the priority list. And then space technologies. And we are seeing space technologies increasingly utilised across the mining value chain. I can give a few examples of that. So AI really is, and particularly Gen AI, is a leading value accelerator. However, there are challenges that remain. And as well as rethinking processes and workflows, what we often don't consider is the data landscape and the data architecture. And without considering that, we struggle to realise value from any digital solution or AI solution, largely because the data typically is quite fragmented. You know, our value chain is typically in silos, which then challenges interoperability. It challenges that collaborative working as well. There are security risks. Operational data is a prime target for cyber attacks, and Gen AI is only exacerbating that. There's a lot of manual process in data management, data governance, particularly looking at the quality of data. And that lack of interoperability actually obstructs innovation, so it limits the innovative capabilities and what we can achieve. So if we focus in on AI, and many of you in this room will have a full understanding of AI, so I won't go into this in detail, but just to give you the broad picture, it's lesser maturity going to high maturity with generative AI in terms of the application landscape. But generative AI doesn't necessarily sit on that maturity curve. You could use it earlier with more descriptive type AI. And just to clarify also, descriptive and diagnostic, you could just use advanced analytics there. It doesn't need AI, but AI certainly can support to automate. So descriptive, we've got what does the data tell us? Diagnostic, what does the data tell us and why is it telling us that? What's the cause of the data telling us that? Predictive, which is where we start to get really smart and utilize machine learning, is, right, given what we know from the data and given what the causes are, if we continue on this trajectory, what is going to happen? Prescriptive, now this is when it gets really smart, and this is where we're moving to with automation of process, because bear in mind, automation is not just about vehicles, it's also automating process. Prescriptive, given what we know of the data, given the why, given the trajectory and what we expect to happen, what action should we take to either mitigate that risk or capture that value? And then you've got generative, which really does sit in the category all on its own. Who here has used ChatGPT? If you put your hand up if you've used ChatGPT. Okay, so quite a lot of you. ChatGPT is actually a really, really useful tool. Generative AI, we were not talking about 3 years ago. Interestingly, in Accenture 2 years ago, we made a massive punt on generative AI prior to ChatGPT being thrown open to the general populace. And what has been interesting about the whole generative AI journey, and we're working with lots of mining clients in this space, is that it has made the mining industry, and probably other industries as well, go back to looking at the whole data governance, data management piece. It had gone off the boil, really. People had got a bit tired of the investment, partly because we'd moved away from being very use case focused. We understand solutions need to be scalable. They need to be applicable across different segments of the value chain where they're relevant. And in order to do that, you need to have a decent data foundation, a decent data architecture and data governance, so you have accessible, reliable data. There was a lot of investment in that about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. But then you had the front end users saying, you're spending millions and millions on this. Where are the actual solutions? We're not getting any reward from this. And the mining companies then were like, oh, okay, yeah, it is taking us too long. Right, let's go back to doing use case, being very use case solution focused. And then generative AI came along. And the value, the applicability is so tangible and so fast that everyone wants to implement it across. There's a whole bunch of different use cases, and I'll talk about those. But for generative AI to be valuable, you need decent, accessible, reliable, quality data. And so what it has done is turn everybody back. Okay, yes, we do need to invest in this, whilst we can also see some very quick returns by applying generative AI. We've done a number of studies looking at the mining industry, the different use cases, how it can be applied in the different segments of the value chain and across the value chain as a whole. All in all, there is huge value. Reduction in the time spent of the workforce, reduction in cost, increase in productivity across the board. And I'm happy to talk to any of you in more detail about that. There are limitations to Gen AI. So you can't take the lid off Gen AI. It's genuinely teaching itself. In fact, I was at the OSDU. It's the Open Subsurface Data Universe. It's a open data platform that the energy industry built or started building 8 years ago, and we're now looking to apply that in the mining industry. I was at the forum in March this year, and someone was doing a demonstration of applying Gen AI into the OSDU platform space. The Gen AI tool worked out it needed to build some additional code in order to do the task that it was being asked to do. It wasn't being instructed to build that additional code. It worked it out, which is quite scary. You can't take the lid off it, so you can't really understand how it's got to an answer, and it will give you a very confident answer, even if it's wrong. So you do need to put some validation steps in place. But in mining at the moment, there are three, and where Gen AI is, there are three main applications of Gen AI. One is in search. So we're working with a number of the mining companies on their global exploration database, enabling them to use the equivalent of ChatGPT on that and say, show me all the drill holes in a particular area that have above 0.5% copper, for example. The other is summary. And again, we're working with a number of mining clients to support their legislation compliance and also to support in the environmental permitting process, because it's a very good tool to take a 3,000 word or 3,000 page ESIA, for example, environmental and social impact assessment, and distill it down to something that's a bit more digestible. So that's search, summary, and the other one is in pointing you in the right direction to correlations. So you could use it for root cause analysis on failure on a piece of equipment, but caveat that with you need to then go and validate it. So it'll get you to the answer faster, and then you can go and check that data in more detail. It does learn biases easily, as does any AI, especially when it's being built by human beings and we're inherently biased. The IP protection is unclear, and there's a number of security vulnerabilities with Gen AI, so you do need to ramp up your cybersecurity. So if we look at now some AI examples, I'm just going to check how much time I'm... Right. Some operational AI examples that AI can be applied across the board, and we've already discussed some of that this morning with Yanni's presentation and some of the plans that he hopes to effect applying AI. From the earliest stages of the value chain prospectivity analysis, a task that geoscientists have been doing for millennia, and now made a lot easier by applying AI to layer the different data sets and vector you to where the correlations are and the most prospective ground. Geotechnical risk management, again, utilizing the data from the ground. You could also use satellite Earth observation data in this case as well. And that Earth observation data is equally applicable to the tailing space and monitoring tailings in a more intelligent way. Supply chain control tower. Supply chain, we typically don't have visibility across the supply chain. We tend to be very reactive in supply chain. And by having a more intelligent supply chain view, so a clear view of your suppliers and the status of certain orders, you're able to then start to become proactive as opposed to reactive with the applicability of AI. And in fact, some of our clients we're working with in the Gen AI space, you can use that as a tool to, if you have a disruption to the supply chain, suggest alternative suppliers and run those against a number of different categories such as distance, lead time, etc. Energy efficiency, I'm going to give a few examples of this, and maintenance optimization, I'll talk about that in more detail as well. And then ES, environmental and social management, I'll cover in a bit more detail. So a few examples in more detail, and all of these are real-world examples where we've been working with mining clients. Reducing fuel consumption in dump trucks, obviously there's a cost benefit, but there's also a decarbonisation benefit. Huge expense. What we have done with multiple clients is collect that fleet management solution and the vehicle monitoring system data from the vehicle itself, identify the different parameters and the correlations across those parameters as to when the largest amount of fuel is being utilized, run the machine learning model to optimize performance, to understand how the machine should be driven and operated for optimal fuel consumption or for minimal fuel consumption, and then link that to financial metrics to monitor the value. That piece we don't do often enough in mining. We very focus on the engineering, and we don't actually tie it to the financials. And it's really helpful because in our home life, you monitor your energy in your house, and you can switch between kilowatts per hour and how much you're consuming and how much that is costing you. And it really causes us to change our behavior. It's exactly the same in the workplace. Energy analytics to reduce energy consumption in comminution. So in this case, I always feel sorry for the crusher, because the crusher always seems to get a bad rap. But this is applicable not just to the crusher, but across all blasting, milling. You collect the energy data and the different process variables. You might be looking at only one of those. You might be just looking at a primary crusher, or you could be looking end to end. Analyze the specific energy consumption metrics, bearing in mind your target particle size, the hardness of the ore. So you need to work with the geoscientists and get the feed from them, which often isn't the case. You often have these separations because every team is working in silos. And then define the optimum fragmentation for the lowest energy consumption end to end along the whole process where you are breaking down that rock. So does it make more sense to crush more finely in the primary crusher, for example, or crush less finely in the primary crusher and put it into the ball mill? So you can map that and optimize across the whole value chain. Maintenance strategy, similar, collect failure data, identify the failure modes and the correlations, diagnose the failure patterns, classify those. And interestingly, we not in mining, but we're doing a project for an aerospace and defense company. And they're using Gen AI for that classification purpose and to identify when a new quality issue is appearing in the manufacturing process. I'm not going to tell you what they're manufacturing because it's all top secret. But the Gen AI is helping them identify when something is happening that hasn't been identified before and creating a new classification and alerting the operators. Predictive maintenance of crusher to increase shell life. So this, again, is looking at your feed materials, so your run-of-mine material properties, coupling that geoscience data with the engineering data, analysing that against wear and tear of, in this case, of the crusher, developing a predictive model to monitor that wear and tear, and then creating a predictive maintenance plan. Through doing this, you're going to make sure you don't over maintain or under maintain, and you reduce unplanned downtime on the crusher itself. Fall of ground, and there, again, so there's a pattern here. Again, coupling geoscience with operational data. So this is a really interesting project, underground coal mine. They had issues with the cavity formation in the roof. And it was it's a long wall mining operation, so it was causing production stoppages for several weeks on end. Plus, obviously, there was a health and safety issue. So what we did, and what we are continuing to support them to do, is model the geoscience data to understand when there are risks of cavities forming, but also take data from the longwall equipment itself, which may give an indication of hardness and stability. Couple those and then give the information, so using a predictive learning, give the information back to the operator to let them know when they're nearing the threshold of risk, tolerable threshold of risk, for cavity formation, and the operator then adjusts the machine, the longwall, to minimize the amount of floor stone they have to take to maintain a stable roof above them. And then finally, environmental and social monitoring. And as I said, the environmental piece has really, really risen up the priority list in the last 12 months or so. I don't know if any of you look at EY's annual mining and metals risk report. If you don't, have a look at it. I know EY is a competitor of Accenture, but it is something that I look at every single year and reference. It is super helpful because it takes a temperature of what's happening in the industry and where the CEOs' minds are at, what their priorities are. They've just released it for 2025, and you should see in the top 10 that rather than lump ESG together, as it has been for the last few years, that those risks are now broken out into very specific concerns, and a lot of them are environmental focused. So you can use AI for many, many applications across environmental and social. You can utilize it for exploration planning, even to understand where you might have access routes, where there might be existing dwellings. You can use it for capital projects planning, especially if you're building a big project where you might have settlements that you need to relocate. And quite often when you're building a new mine, you start off with, there is 400 people who live in this settlement. By the time you get to relocation, there's 4,000 people who live in this settlement suddenly that all need relocating to new housing. So it's a very useful tool. You can also use it for vegetation, biodiversity monitoring. Strategy built for success. So just 2 more slides, Marcus. The barriers to success. These are no different to what I was talking about 3 years ago. They remain the same, and to some degree they've been exacerbated. Talent availability is a problem. We've talked about that and how we attract the next gen into the workforce. Skill diversity is an issue. We need a diversity of skills greater than ever before. New ways of working, and Agile was mentioned, and the challenge with Agile, that we have moved considerably in the industry from a very clear-cut, quite engineering mindset to something that requires a completely different approach, where you're getting given information through the course of your day or through your shift that you then need to act upon, you need to make a decision upon. And that requires a different way of thinking. And really, people need training in that, as well as the technical capabilities. Workforce buy-in, absolutely critical. Love the fact that you're involving operators from the earliest stages of developing solutions. Focusing on technology, I see this less and less. This is certainly where we started digital transformation 10 years ago. I've got my lovely digital hammer. Now let me go and look for a nail. It really does have to be based on business need. Where are the challenges in the business? Where is the risk? Where are the value opportunities of doing this a completely different way? And that's where we then go to our technology toolkit and say, what do we need in order to support this change? Focusing primarily on use cases without thinking about, is this scalable? How can I apply this across different segments of the value chain where relevant? That has cost the industry a lot of money by just simply focusing on a list of 200 use cases and let's prioritize those without thinking about the bigger picture or tying it to the business strategy. And then no strategy for data architecture and solution sustainability. So I'll start with that one at the bottom, and this is the last slide. So I'll start with that one. Sustainability is critical. With Gen AI, and even with just normal AI, we are generating huge quantities of data. And typically in our industry, we save all data. Just keep all the data. We might need it for a rainy day. Something might come back and bite us in the bum if we don't have this data to refer back to. When in fact, what we should do is be more strategic about it. Because to store this data costs a huge amount of money. To run solutions, especially Gen AI solutions, the computational power required costs a lot of money, plus uses a ginormous amount of energy, and that is only going to get worse. So we need to be strategic on this. Data strategy and readiness, think broad, think your data architecture, think accessibility. Is my data clean, reliable? If not, I need to go and fix that first. Cybersecurity, not thought about enough. It really is still thought about as just a wraparound. And we need to embed that cybersecurity thinking into every user and every solution that's built. Transformation on the fly, we're still working with legacy systems. There is nothing wrong with that at all, but we do need to get a bit comfortable, more comfortable with working with the legacy systems at the same time as implementing more state-of-the-art capabilities, and then you can move out the legacy systems once they become obsolete. Integration and interoperability, this is people, process and technology. There is huge power in interoperability. Connectivity and infrastructure will be relevant to whatever the application is and the context. Think about edge compute, think about data in the cloud. And then finally, workforce, we really do need to upskill more. We need to think about training in a different way. This isn't training people on new technology. This is training people to be more agile in their execution of their responsibilities. And finally, last time I had my favorite saying from John F. Kennedy about the risks and costs of comfortable inaction. I thought I'd look to a more recent president. Obviously, the current and the last one didn't come up with any valuable statements. So this one from Barack Obama, we did not come to fear the future, we came here to shape it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liv. I think we have still time for 1 or 2 questions. So I make myself ready to throw the box somewhere. Any questions? Otherwise, it's, of course, perfectly fine to ask later as well. Good. But I can ask a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you have been following Boliden for some time. If you would like to give us some candid feedback where we are in terms of digitalization, what would that be?
I think you're making progress. And that certainly is evident from seeing the talks 3 years ago. 3 years ago to now. Some of those guidelines that I really harp on about, like involving the operators, like thinking about scalability, though you clearly are embedding those, you probably could go a bit faster, but maybe that's about investment availability. But you're certainly making progress.
Good. Thank you very much. And thank you, David.